When you live surrounded by cameras and screens, you learn to tell love from obsession. I always knew there were fans who crossed the line, but So-yeon, she was different. I noticed her for the first time at a concert in Seoul. She was in the front row with a fixed, direct, heavy gaze. A look that seemed to pierce through my skin and seep in, as if it were digging into my soul. It wasn't the admiration of someone inspired, it was something darker. But I wasn't prepared for what was to come. The first signs were harmless, gifts left at hotel doors and messages on social media. So-yeon signed each item with a kind of desperate devotion, a love that seemed boundless. But to me, she was just another intense fan, nothing I hadn't experienced before. Until the night she sent me a message in the middle of the night. "I'm watching you," it said. I was home alone. That message echoed in the silence of my dark room, making me feel an almost panic-like dread. Yet again, my manager told me to ignore it. "We can't go to the police over this, Jisoo," he insisted. "Any scandal would tarnish your image, and fans like her only want attention. If you react, she'll try something worse. Ignore her, she'll stop." But she didn't stop. Days later, she appeared again. Not at a concert, not at an event, but outside my house in the dead of night. I saw the glow of her phone from across the street, and that same intense gaze as if she were spying through the walls. It was like a shadow secretly watching me. Desperate, I decided to investigate. I installed security cameras inside my house. I made sure to cover every corner, every entry and exit, any gap where she might be watching me. But it was in vain. The next day, when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing. No movement, nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, I knew she had been there. I found notes left in impossible places, as if she had a key to my life, an invisible key that I didn't know how she'd obtained. One of those nights, I found a note on my bed. "I watched you sleep. I stayed awake until dawn, with a growing tension I couldn't control. But I was trapped, unable to act without my manager's permission, who still forbade me from calling the police. Let's keep this out of the press, Jisoo. You don't want to ruin your career over an unbalanced fan," he said. It was as if the industry itself was trapping me with her, leaving me with no way out. But everything got worse when So-yeon started approaching the people I loved. She somehow got the number of my childhood friend and began sending him messages. Days later, he disappeared. The last message he sent me felt like a silent farewell, a sense of emptiness that chilled my soul. I knew in that moment that she had something to do with it. But who would believe me? A K-pop idol being terrorized by a fan. My manager still told me to ignore it, that I was seeing things where there was nothing. So I decided to investigate on my own. I searched the building, questioned the security guards, but no one had ever seen her enter. It was as if she were a shadow, an invisible presence that slipped through walls, untouchable. Each time I reviewed the cameras, I felt an emptiness, a complete helplessness. She was there somewhere, but the technology couldn't capture her presence. The visits to my home started becoming more disturbing. One night, I went to the kitchen to get water and noticed the window was slightly open, though I was certain I had closed it. A chill ran down my spine. I was no longer alone. I felt her presence even without seeing her, like electricity in the air, the weight of a gaze I couldn't detect. She began sending me messages that grew more personal. "I know you wear that gray sweater in winter, even indoors. I know you sleep with your left hand resting on your chest." They were details that no one, except someone who had been watching me, could know. But with each new message, the fear grew, eating away at my strength. Then, one night, she went too far. I was lying down, exhausted, when I received a message. It was a picture of me sleeping, taken from inside my room. That shattered my sleep. I scoured the entire house, looking for any evidence, any sign of how she was getting in. But there was nothing. It was as if So-yeon wasn't real, an invisible presence surrounding me, capable of being anywhere, at any time. My life became an endless vigil. I knew she wouldn't stop. Every step I took was followed by the sensation that she was there, hiding, laughing at my helplessness. And meanwhile, my career, my personal life, everything was falling apart. Friendships faded, people distanced themselves, as if she were a curse, an entity isolating everything around me. On the last night I saw her, I decided to confront her. I knew where she lived, a small apartment on the outskirts, which I discovered by searching her social media. I entered her home, feeling a coldness that seemed to seep from the floor, the ceiling, as if her presence was ingrained in the walls. The apartment was dark, an acrid smell lingered in the air. On the walls, I saw something that made my stomach turn, Photos of me, newspaper clippings, objects I had lost, now displayed like a sick altar. And in the midst of it all, So-yeon, sitting on the floor with that vacant smile. She was whispering something, a disturbing chant, as if she were conjuring my image right there. I was paralyzed. And at that moment, I felt she was not human. There was something supernatural about her, something I couldn't explain, but that chilled me to the bone. It was as if she had abandoned any trace of humanity to become a shadow that inhabited the walls of my mind. Somehow, I managed to get out of that house, and the next day, So-yeon had disappeared. I never heard from her again. The suffocating presence faded as if it had grown tired of toying with me. But to this day, on lonely nights, I still feel that weight, that gaze, that whisper that seems to come from within, as if somehow she is still there.
I've always been fascinated by Korea's urban legends, the ancient stories, the shadows lurking between the alleys. This country has an eerie allure, imprinted even in the busiest city streets. So when I heard about the Gwanlyo, the legendary Hall of the Watcher, I knew I had to uncover the truth. The story, they say, dates back to the Joseon dynasty. The Gwanlyo was a hidden place where high officials kept prisoners, enemies of the kingdom, sentenced to something worse than a dark cell. At some point, the Gwanlyo took on a new purpose as a shadow court, where sins were judged and souls consumed. They say the spirit of the Watcher, a figure with hollow eyes and torn eyelids, haunted the place, unable to release the sinners bold enough to enter. No one has ever found physical evidence of the Gwanlyo, just traces in old stories. I'd heard it was hidden in an old alley, far from modern eyes, in a building of ancient stone that no one dared to renovate. I looked around and found myself alone, surrounded by silent buildings and distant murmurs from a soul that didn't care. And there it was, the gate, a twisted mass of aging wood that seemed to pulse as if alive. A faint sigh seemed to welcome me as I pushed through the creaking wood. As soon as I entered, everything changed. The air was heavy, oppressive. The sound of the city vanished as if by magic. It was as though the gate had transported me to another reality. The walls were narrow, stifling, and everything smelled of mold and rusty iron. I tried to light the way with my phone flashlight, but the darkness swallowed it whole. Every step felt like a punch in my chest. The floor beneath me was too soft, a damp and unsettling touch underfoot. I walked for minutes, maybe hours, and then I saw the hall. In the center was a single old chair made of polished wood, carved with details that looked like twisted human figures. It seemed to be made for someone of high status, but the backrest was damaged as though it had been clawed at. All around the room were dozens of framed portraits on the stone walls, men and women, their faces blurred but with their eyes sharp, staring back at me. They looked alive. Their expressions were a blend of horror and pleading, as if they wanted to scream but were trapped in the silence of the frame. And that's when I felt it right behind me, the Watcher. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a thick, sickly sweet stench, mixed with something rotten. I didn't dare turn around immediately, but I knew it was there. When I finally mustered the courage, I slowly turned and I saw him. The Watcher was a figure cloaked in shadows, except for his eyes, hollow yet deep like endless voids. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and he seemed to smile, but it was a twisted smile where his lips curved at angles that defied nature. He stared at me, and in that instant, a sharp pain tore through my chest, as if he was pulling something from deep inside me. I almost screamed, but I fought to keep control, or at least tried to. My vision blurred as though he was draining everything I was. On the wall, a figure began to form, the outline of my own face, pale and distorted, joining the others, with the same expression of horror and emptiness. I realized then he wasn't after bodies. He was imprisoning souls, feelings, fragments of essence that transformed into formless prisoners trapped forever in the shadowy hall. I tried to run, but it was as though the air around me had turned to cement. My steps slowed, heavy and labored. Every second dragged on. Every movement was torture. I could hear whispers, moans, stifled voices echoing like a haunting chant, reverberating off the walls and piercing my mind. Every second in the hall drained me. It seemed to consume everything I had. With the last of my strength, I looked back at the exit gate, but it was gone. Now, I think I understand the fate of those faces on the walls. They aren't just portraits. They're reflections of something still pulsing, prisoners of the Gwanlyo, watched for eternity by that eyeless figure, feeding on our very essence. I see them, and I know I'm becoming one of them. My face joins theirs. I, the bold one, the curious one. I am now part of the Hall of the Watcher.
Have you ever heard of the Gwanlyo of the Lonely Road? I doubt anyone who knows the story would dare tell you the details, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. Not out of courage, but because, well, maybe if I tell you, the Gwanlyo will finally let me go. This story is both a warning and a goodbye. It was a regular late autumn day when I ventured onto that road. Known in Korea as the Lonely Road, it cuts through the mountains north of Seoul and is famous for disappearing into the mist at twilight. They say it's the kind of place where the worlds of the living and the dead overlap, and where beings who were once human appear to those who dare to challenge them. I went there on a dare, yeah, a stupid one. At the time it seemed funny, you know. The old legend of the Gwanlyo, the vengeful spirit of the road who appeared to those walking alone there as night fell. They say the Gwanlyo was someone who, well, he never had the chance to move on, for reasons too dark for anyone to want to know. It was supposed to be a quick walk, a little courage test, so with my head held high and a flashlight, I began walking down the road. The fog descended fast, covering the mountain view, and the silence that fell was almost solid, as if it had swallowed up all the sounds of the forest around me. 10 minutes in, and the road seemed to stretch, as if it didn't want me to leave. When I turned around to see if I'd gone far enough, I noticed something bizarre. The trees around me looked closer. It was as if they'd leaned in, curving toward me to watch what I was doing to trap me. And that's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the road was a figure. It didn't look like a spirit, nor like a person. It was a man, or what was left of him, with dark, hollow eyes, pale skin, but not in the way you'd expect. It was as if all color, all life had been sucked out. He stared at me, and I felt the air around me thicken. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. But then he started whispering. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but they were ancient words, harsh syllables. I could only pick up a tone of accusation, of sorrow, a resentment so thick that the air felt like a weight on my chest. And that's when I realized the sounds I was hearing weren't from his voice, but from something resonating in my mind, like an echo from another life, another existence. I wanted to run. My instinct screamed, but something kept me rooted to the ground. What happened next, I can't explain. The Gwanlyo extended a hand, but didn't touch me. I felt a chill sliding through my bones like liquefied ice. Memories I didn't recognize began flooding my mind. The vision of someone fallen, the deserted road, rain blurring the distant city lights. These weren't my memories, but they were real. My chest tightened, and then I understood. That was his suffering, and somehow I was the final piece he needed to keep going, in that cycle, as if I were just another thread in the web of tragedy that held him captive. I wanted to scream, but my voice, it was just a wisp of air. I won't lie to you, my body shook like never before. The figure seemed to smile in a twisted way, a smile that was more from pain than anything else, and I knew I was trapped. Then he spoke in a rough voice, almost emotionless. He chose to come. I stood there, unable to look away. The Gwanlyo had something tragic about him, like an open wound that never healed. And like a fool, I asked, "What do you want from me?" He stayed silent, and then I saw what he had once seen, a bottomless fall, a despair he couldn't escape. The road, once empty, was now full of figures, all with the same hollow eyes. Eyes of those whose lives had been torn away abruptly, an event with no goodbyes. This wasn't just a road. It was an eternal memorial for those who never found peace. I don't remember how I got out of there. All I know is that I returned home with that feeling, that chill, as if he were still inside me. The memories that aren't mine keep flashing through my mind like fragments of a life I never lived. And every time I see a lonely road, I feel his presence. If you still want to explore, know that lonely roads hide much more than just curves.